So welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Bayless. I am a high school teacher and counselor here in the Victoria area. And I'm really excited to be here and practicing with you today. I'm also a mindfulness and self-compassion trained teacher, and I've been teaching practices around self-compassion for the last couple years, and it's a real strong passion of mine. I have a really big belief that we need to support the well-being of educators, and that self-compassion is one of the strongest containers that we can use to support our own well-being so that we can be present with our students. I want to acknowledge that today I'm coming from the Algonquin-speaking People's Territories on the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations. On this beautiful sunny day, we have this lovely environment around us, and how lucky that we get to be present on these lands at this time, and maybe just giving space and time for whatever lands that you are arriving on, as we are guests here on these lands on this beautiful sunny day. So I'm going to be jumping in and out of screens. I'm going to be sharing some of my screens so that you can see some information that I would normally put up on a PowerPoint, and we're going to do our best to engage that way. And what I'm going to ask is, if you have questions, just write them down, and then I'll have times where we can actually come back to questions. You will need a pen and paper at some point for some of the practices that we're going to do. So I invite you to just ensure that you have some sort of pen or paper that you can have access to as we go. Because it's really important that we do some reflection and some inquiry through some of the practices that we're going to go through. So I'm going to ignore the chat. Ed's going to take care of letting people in and out. Thanks, Ed. And we're going to leave the chat alone for a little bit. And the first thing we're going to do actually is I'm going to just share my screen for a second, and we're going to arrive together. So this is an invitation to just sit and arrive and be still. So whatever you're doing, I invite you to just take anything out of your hands. If you're enjoying a cup of coffee or tea for a moment, just put it down, put that pen and paper down. Finding a spot in wherever you are in your room to just acknowledge yourself in whatever's holding you, whether it's the floor or the chair. If it feels right to you, to close your eyes. If not, maybe just lowering your gaze, allowing yourself to come into this present moment for a moment. Perhaps noticing how the floor is holding your feet, how the chair is holding your seat. Just bringing your body into a sense of awareness in this space. Maybe giving yourself just a nice, juicy, deep breath in. One that just fills you up, and an exhale that allows you just to release and let go. Sometimes we're so busy moving from all the things that we need to do that we need to just have some space to be and to arrive. So we're just going to give ourselves permission to be present throughout this time together, to be open to learning, and to be willing to try and expand. And we do this by keeping our attention on just this moment. Perhaps the first thing we can do to expand our awareness is to be just aware of the sounds around you in your room, in your space. Noticing if there's any different sounds from far away. And perhaps just being with them, not really judging them or figuring out what's going on with them, and just acknowledging all that's happening around you. And then bringing that awareness maybe a little closer and noticing if there's any sounds that are quite near you. Maybe it's the sound of your beautiful breath. Or the sounds of digestion from your morning breakfast. And then as that awareness comes into our body, just really noticing any sensations through your body. Noticing if there's any good sensations, a sense of ease or comfort. Noticing if there's any challenging or negative sensations in your body, some discomfort or unwellness. And then perhaps noticing if there's any neutral sensations that your body is existing just as it is. And then just for a moment, let's go back to that difficult sensations. Maybe it's tightness in your shoulders, or a sore neck, or strained eyes from all these online calls. Just sort of allowing yourself to be with that little bit of discomfort. Not a lot, just an awareness to it. And just for a moment, inviting maybe some gentleness towards it, like, oh, it's hard. My body's going through a lot right now. All this sitting, or maybe it's your thoughts that are busy. Perhaps you can just be gentle towards those. That gentleness may come with some kind words or just a feeling of, oh, okay, there it is. This is hard. And then letting go of any of that. And just coming back to your breath again. Maybe a breath that fills you up with an inhale again. And a nice releasing exhale. And then I'm going to ring a chime. And I invite you just to allow the chime to ring. And when it comes to a complete stop, an end, to reopen your eyes and come back to this connection. So that very short little practice is mostly for me, really, because, it helps me center as I arrive, but it's also a really lovely practice for you to get a sense of where we're going today, an awareness of what's going on for us. Maybe noticing some of the difficult things that are happening in our body, in our world, and then meeting them with perhaps a little bit of tenderness and kindness. And that's our journey that we're going to be on today. And although it sounds easy, sometimes in practice it's not as easy. And there is a practice to go along with that we need to continue to come back to. So this is our journey, and I'm really happy you're all here. Thank you for showing up, everybody. The first thing I want to do with all of us actually is an activity. And so I'm going to invite you to get out a piece of paper and a pen. And we're going to talk a little bit about self-compassion and mindful self-compassion. This work that I'm going to tell you about is research through most of the work by Kristen Neff. This is her in this picture. Kristen and I had the privilege of working together on a project through Mindful Schools where we're talking about self-compassion for educators. You can see her book down there in the corner in the bottom, Self-Compassion. And then she's created a program with her colleague Chris Germer. He wrote the book, The Mindful Self-Compassion, and together they created the Mindful Self-Compassion workbook. We're going to do a very touch, like just a little taste, dipping our toe into some of this work. But if after this you feel interested and want to learn more, then I invite you to explore some of those books and to learn more about that. So here's the first activity we're going to do. It's called How Do I Treat a Friend? So with your pen and paper in front of you right now, what I want you to do is I want you to think of a time when you've had a really close friend who is suffering or struggling in some way. Maybe they've been in the midst of a pandemic and they're having a really hard time with it. Or maybe they're struggling with how to engage with their students in their school. Or perhaps they're struggling and having a hard time with connecting with their partner at some point or with their own kids. I want you just to think about whatever you know, a dear friend of yours that's having a hard time right now, and I want you to just for a moment write down some of the words that you would say to them. What is it that you say to a dear friend who's really struggling? So taking a moment, writing a few things down, I want you to also pay attention. What's your tone of voice? Like, what does it sound like when you talk to them? Maybe even noticing, what's your body language like? How do you approach them? How do you sit with them? What are the words you use? And I'm just going to give you a minute. We won't take long on this, but taking a moment to just jot a few things down. Thinking again, what are some of the words or phrases you may say to a really dear friend who's struggling? What's your tone of voice? What's your body language like? I'm just going to give you one more moment to think about that. And if you've finished and you've written a few things, then you can just close your eyes and sit for a moment. We're just going to give everybody a chance to have a reflection on this. And then I invite all of you just to close your eyes for a moment, thinking about what you just wrote down for your friend. And then I want you to think about a time that you were struggling just like your friend was. Maybe you were going through the exact same scenario. Maybe you are struggling through a pandemic or having a really difficult time connecting with your students and teaching in this new format, or you're struggling at home trying to co-teach or homeschool your own children and teach, or you're struggling in relationships or with colleagues. And then I want you to do the same thing. I want you to write down, what is it that you say to yourself during these times? What's your tone of voice sound like? Perhaps, what's your body language showing you? What's it feel like? What do you say to yourself when you're struggling or when you're suffering? What tone of voice do you use? And then, just as we're back here together, I want you to think about it for a second. Was there much of a difference? Was there a difference in perhaps how we treat a friend and how we treat ourselves? And just acknowledging that, maybe those of you with your camera on or in the chat, you can tell me yes or no. You can say yes, no. How was there a difference? Some of you are giving me a few thumbs up that yes. Yes, there was a difference. I'm assuming that yes, this means that there was a difference. Totally different. Way more compassionate from friends, Jen says. Jen, you're not alone. You can see sort of in the group around us here that quite a few of us are giving these thumbs up, that we're noticing that we're much harder on ourselves, that we find it much more easier to be compassionate to our friends, to other people. So some of the preliminary research around this, and most of Kristen's work is out of the States, but you know, she found about 80% of us are definitely much more easier to be compassionate to other people. About 15% are actually say, like, you know, I'm okay, I can be compassionate to myself, but it's really hard to be with other people. And sometimes this is depending on where we are in our life. And then there's about, you know, 5% of people who can do both, that they can hold this space, that they can be compassionate for others and support their own well-being. And this is where we're trying to grow, right? We want to try and grow this practice of how can we create more space for other people and for ourselves, because the basic practice around self-compassion is, can I treat myself the way I would treat a dear friend? And this has a real huge impact on how we support ourselves. So many of you said, yeah, it was really easy to hold space for other people. I'm much harder on myself. Well, you know, we have this saying that, you know, be careful what you're saying to yourself, because guess what? You're listening, you know? And when we're listening to ourselves and we're not treating ourselves with kindness, it can be really difficult. And this is one of those practices that really shifted for me in how I changed and supported my practice around self-compassion. And I did this because I did this exercise. And then I realized I have two children. They're both school age, and my youngest daughter her name is Gracie, and she's 8. And I started realizing that with her, I'm really compassionate. You know, when she's hurt or when she's upset, it's really easy to be caring and loving and kind towards her. And many of you as educators can probably find this with other students or your own children or other people, as you said. But when I was struggling with something, I was really hard on myself. And I started realizing that maybe I shouldn't talk to myself. The words that I say to myself, they should be words that I would say out loud to her. And it shifted in how I talk to myself. It made the beginning of an impact. And so I'm going to give you 3 different exercises and 3 different practices throughout this time together. And this is the first one I want you to start paying attention to. The first one is, can I treat myself the way I would a dear friend? Are the words that I say to my own self, to my heart, to myself when in a moment of suffering and struggle, would I say them out loud to anybody else? Would I say them out loud to my students, to my children, to my best friend? And if the answer is no, then there's an invitation to think about how could I start to shift those? And we're going to practice that a little bit today. But so the first takeaway from today I want you to think about is, can I treat myself as I would a dear friend? One of the first practices around compassion. So compassion, the actual word compassion just means to meet suffering or to see some suffering and then to want to elicit a caring response. Right? I see that you're struggling. We just did this with a friend. I noticed that my friend is struggling. I sense it, and I want to help them. So compassion is actually a really positive emotion because there's this desire to help and to care. It comes from a caring spot. Self-compassion is just that ability to do that for ourselves. I notice this one here, she's having a hard time, or he's having a hard time. I'm struggling, they're struggling. Can I meet myself in this moment with a bit of, can I alleviate some of this struggle and practice of helping myself? So I want to talk a little bit more about what actually is compassion. So we're going to just talk about what is self-compassion. And this is some of the work based on Kristen Neff. She talks about there's 3 components. And these 3 components are really key in understanding how we practice. And the first one we kind of started with is this idea of mindfulness. We actually have to know that we're struggling or suffering so that we can pay attention to it, so we can be aware of it. If we're not even aware of it, I mean, and I don't know how many of you, but I've had those days where I finish a day in my school and I'm just amped up. I'm just so stressed and so overwhelmed. And when I stop for a moment and realize, oh, this is what's happening, it takes a little bit of that stress away. Because if not, we just kind of keep running on that treadmill, right? We keep going in that stress response. So mindfulness is a really key first response because it allows us to be aware, start to pay attention to, oh, this one's having a hard day, or I'm having a really tough time right now, or this feeling doesn't feel good, or my body hurts, or this thought I'm having is just ruminating, right? And what happens with mindfulness is it takes us out of that non-thinking and overthinking and brings us back into the wisdom, the middle of, here I am, I'm in this moment. And perhaps we can try and do that without judgment or overreacting, but there's just this, connected presence, this ability to be present. So we start with this piece, and throughout mindful self-compassion, this mindfulness is implicit through all of it because we need to have an awareness. The second one that's really important, the second component of self-compassion, is that I'm going to skip over to the little thought bubbles, is this concept of connectedness. Kristen Neff calls it common humanity. And my goodness, have we ever been in a time of common humanity as we are in right now? Our whole world is sharing the same stress, the same struggle. I mean, if a pandemic won't bring us into this attention, then I don't know what will, but this is just, we are all in this. And, there's a really, I don't know exactly the saying, and it's like, we may not all be having the same, we're struggles, but we're not all in the same boat, but we're all in the same water right now. We're all kind of having to figure out how to manage this. And what common humanity and connectedness does, it reminds us we're not alone. It reminds us that every single human being goes through a struggle or suffers or has stress. And often what happens for some of us, we think, oh, no, 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 you know, like my problems aren't really worthy. We even have a term for it, you know, it's called my first world problems. And yet what we do is we negate the fact that in this moment, there is a struggle or a stress. Sometimes what we do is over-identify with our stress. I'm the only one who feels this way. I cannot believe it. And again, there's this continuum somewhere in the middle when we realize we're all in this together. We all struggle. And what it does is it helps to take that aloneness, that loneliness out of it, and remembers that you and you and you and me, we're all kind of having to figure this out together. And then the third component, which is just this beautiful piece, is when we're aware and we know we're not alone, can we meet it with some kindness? Can we actually be gentle and tender towards ourselves? Can we meet ourselves with a sense of grace? And this practice is the one that says, hey, can I talk to myself the way I would a dear friend? Can I meet myself with a bit of gentleness rather than an inner critic? And I can't see you all right now, but I can imagine many of you, if I say how many of you have an inner critic, a lot of yeses and hands might come up. When we have an inner critic, it adds more stress into our life, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But what we want to actually discover is our inner kindness, is our self-kindness, is the way we talk to ourselves. And when we bring these three together, there's this loving, connected presence that we offer ourselves. And when we start to learn to offer it to ourselves, we can usually start to offer it to other people. So we use these practices, these components of self-compassion, so that we can really understand how to meet ourselves. And, you know, these three practices, mindfulness, self-compassion, and connectedness, we're going to try in an exercise in a second. But first of all, I just want to talk about why the research has shown that when we do these practices, we tend to be happier, more resilient, and less stressed. We tend to bounce back from stress. We tend to be more aware, and we can relate with other people. And one of the big ones that I'm finding this with most of the educators that I'm working with is that it actually helps to calm that inner critic and take away from that perfectionist thinking, is that it can actually decrease our stress response when we practice these exercises. And what a lovely gift when we can do this together. So I wanted to do those few little things together so you have a little bit of understanding. Loving connected presence is a really key piece in all of this. How many of you have ever heard of the term compassion fatigue? You can put your hand up, you can give me a thumbs up, you can say yes in the chat. You've heard of the term. I'm seeing a few hellos and yes. Yeah. So compassion fatigue comes from this idea that we're just giving so much. And how many of you may feel like you're feeling this right now as educators in a world where like we're connecting? I see some hands like, yes, me, yes, 100%, right? So many of this. So I wanted to just touch on this term for a little bit because I think it resonates so much with educators, as for many of us, we're givers. We are making ourselves available and more so than ever. And I don't know about you, but as we're on these, you know, this online learning time for many of us, I am more available with my students and with my colleagues than I've ever been. And that can be really exhausting. We're so present with other people that we're not always present with ourselves. Well, I was saying before that compassion is a really positive emotion. You know, when we meet and connect with suffering and want to alleviate it, there's some positive, we actually get a positive response for this. And so often what happens with compassion is that it's an innate feeling that we continue to give, we continue to offer to people, and especially when we see they're struggling, when we see our students struggling, when we see our colleagues struggling. One of the things that, you know, I've learned and through this practice is that actually we have lots of compassion for other people, but what happens is we feel exhausted, the sense of fatigue, when we're not practicing for ourselves. We're not taking that time to do the self-compassion practices. We need to fill ourselves up before we can give this out. And Kristen Neff talks about this in the practice of what she calls the yin and the yang of self-compassion. So yin is of love and connection and softening in towards ourselves. It's the ability to really support ourselves in these moments. It's kind of like if you imagine a mother or a parent just holding a baby and looking at it and just feeling this warmth and connection towards it. This is this loving self-compassion. This is this gentle yin side. But there's this other side, right? There's this yang side. And this yang side is this protectiveness. It's this wanting to help and to go out and to support other people in our lives. And maybe sometimes it's boundary setting, it's bravery, it's courage. And you know, I love Kristen, how she talks about this. This is this like, if yin was the mama, yang is the mama bear. It's this like, I've got this fiercely protective part of myself that also needs to go out and protect other people. But the thing is for many of us, especially as educators, we're really good at that part. We're mama bears, right? We're out there and we're working and we're protecting and we're caring and we're supporting other people. We're forgetting this other piece, this yin stuff. So a lot of the work that I'm going to just share with you over the next, little bit is this practice of yin and caring for ourselves. Because if we want to have enough capacity to give out and care for other people, we need to really care for ourselves first. And what happens if we don't is we feel that sense of fatigue, the sense of burnout, the sense of exhaustion. And yet when we take the moments to care for ourselves, and this concept of self-care is really relevant right now. And I don't know if you're hearing a lot about it in your district, but I know we're hearing a lot about it in our district. Caring for yourself is really a key component. And the reason in self-compassion, we actually call this behavioral self-compassion, right? It's the actions around caring for ourselves. Because if we want to be able to be present and care for other people, we have to be able to look after ourselves. So I told you I wanted to talk about 3 things that are practices for you. The first was, how do I treat myself how do I talk to myself the way I would a friend? The second practice I want to talk to you about right now, and I'm just going to jump back into my slides here because sometimes it's easier to have a visual component, is this concept of physiology around self-compassion and self-criticism. Stress response is happening, and a lot of us we know this concept of, our sympathetic system, which is our fight, flight, or freeze, and stress happening. And there's a lot going on in our external world right now that's causing this stress response. However, we're really good at adding an extra stress response with our inner critic. So for many of us, when there's not a pandemic going on, when there's not a lot of other external stresses, we continue to cause stress in our body by criticizing ourselves, by being really hard on ourselves. And we interact this threat system in our body. So, what we know right now is that the sort of the modern human, or the modern set point of stress right now is sort of like at a set point of stress response, which means like our stress should happen and then it should go down, and then it should happen and then it should go down. And we're all kind of staying up here. And more so than ever at this point in our world is that we sort of stay up here in this stress response. And during a pandemic, that's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling a lot all the time. To be able to calm our stress response, we actually have to jump into another system called our caregiving system. And when we practice self-compassion, what we're doing is we're actually coming back to this caregiving system. This is like that mama system, right? That yin, that caring for ourselves system. And when we use self-compassion practices, what we actually do is take down that threat system, and we allow ourselves some feelings of safety and care and love. And there's 2 components of this that are really, really key. And the 2 components are tone, how we talk to ourselves, and a sense of touch and gentle touch. So for many of us, when we are with children, or we know little ones, when we see them hurt, or even big ones, big children, or our pets or our beings, when they're hurt, what's the first thing we do is we just wrap them up, right? We hold them when they're suffering. What we stop doing is actually meeting ourselves with that practice as well. And so I want to offer you a practice right now, and it's called soothing or supportive touch. And this is the first time I did this, it felt super awkward. And so I'm going to invite you to just try it and to play with it for a few minutes, because it may seem awkward to you too. But what I've learned is learning to practice this and trying it when I feel stressed, offering myself just a gentle touch to say, hey, it's okay, can be a really good lean into helping myself in this moment. And I think about, again, how I would hold anyone who's suffering. The first thing I want to do is put my arm around them. How can we do that for ourselves? So we're going to try a little practice right now, and I'm going to invite you to try it as well. If it feels awkward or silly, that's okay. Just play with me for a few minutes, okay? So I'm going to invite you just to close your eyes or lower your gaze, maybe just not engage in the screen for a second. And I'm going to offer you some gestures you can offer to yourself. And as you're going through them, I want you just to notice how they feel. Noticing what's going on in your inner experience as you start to notice and feel them. So the first thing, I just invite you to put maybe one hand over your heart. Just as a gentle, maybe applying a little pressure. Maybe even two hands over your heart. Just like, oh, we're just going to hold this heart in a hug right now. Maybe you keep one hand over your heart and put one hand over your belly. Maybe it feels like a hug that you can offer yourself with. Maybe you slide and put two hands on your belly, just as a gentle, warming touch. Perhaps you take your hand and you just hold one hand on your cheek, like you would hold a dear one's face. Or maybe you cradle your hands and both hands on your cheeks, just holding your face. Perhaps maybe just stroking your arm or crossing your arms over and giving yourself a gentle squeeze. Or maybe you just cup your hands in your lap and you hold your own hand. I invite you to play with this for a second and go back to maybe one or two that resonated with you or just felt. And I want you to think about, in a moment of a challenging time, how could we use this sense of touch as an offering to just know that it's okay? The other piece that's really important as you're practicing this, pay attention to the tone of voice you're using right now. Maybe as you're just exploring this a little bit, are you saying, oh, this is weird, this is hard? Or is it, this is weird, this is hard? And noticing that actually the tone of our voice has a huge impact on how we talk to each other. So just coming back for a moment, after you explored that, I want you just to recognize that this is the second strategy that I want you to sort of take away with you right now. This concept of touch and tone. Couldn't you offer yourself a caring touch in a moment that's a struggle? And how is your tone? Because believe it or not, tone has one of the most impactful ways of how we speak with ourselves. I can leave this meeting and say, oh man, that was terrible. I had such a bad joke and it didn't go over well and everyone thought I was an idiot. Or I could leave this meeting and go like, oh, I just didn't go so well. And I had that joke and everyone might have thought I was an idiot, but that's okay. My connection to those two different things are going to be how I respond. And when I can respond to myself with a gentle tone and maybe a soothing touch, it helps me in the moment to just be aware. So I said I was going to give you 3 practices. The first one, how do I treat myself the way I would treat a friend? The second one, we're going to talk about tone and touch. And the third one is an exercise we're going to try right now. And it's called a self-compassion break. So what I really would like you to do, again, is just to find a really comfortable position, allowing yourself to just, we're going to drop into a really juicy practice here. I'm really sorry, but one of the things that I'm going to ask you in this practice is actually to think about a difficult time in your life. So I'm apologizing early because I'm going to invite you to find a little bit of stress in your body for a moment. So as you've settled into your body, perhaps if it feels right to close your eyes partially or fully, I want you to bring to mind a situation that's causing a little bit of difficulty in your life, that's causing a little bit of stress. Could be a health problem, a relationship problem, a work problem, could be a pandemic. But I also want you to acknowledge that this problem is mild to moderate. What I don't want us doing right now is jumping into something that's a 9 out of 10 of stress in your life. So if you're kind of like into this really huge stress, I want you to dial it back because we want to practice where we can actually support ourselves. And sometimes 9 out of 10 problems are a little bit too hard. So there's a problem that's like, if you were thinking of a scale as 10 being off the charts, 1 is too easy, something that's like a 3, a 4, something that we can feel a little bit of discomfort, but not get carried away by it. So taking a moment, choosing a mild to moderate problem in your life. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves when we first start practicing self-compassion. And then once you have just one scenario, if many are going through your mind, just choose one. I want you to allow yourself to really see yourself in this situation. Feel it. Feel your way into the problem. Notice whatever uneasiness in your body might come up. And actually connect with a little bit of discomfort, whether it's physical discomfort in your body or just sort of some discomfort in your thoughts or feelings. Then I'm going to offer you some phrases, and I invite you just to say them and offer them back to yourself. The first one, this is a moment of suffering. What we're doing here is actually mindfully bringing an awareness into some of the struggles in our life. Might just say, "Oh, this hurts," or "This is really hard right now." We're just inviting an awareness in. Then I invite you to say to yourself, suffering is a part of living. This is common humanity. We're not alone right now. In fact, everybody is suffering in some way. Others are just like me. We all struggle in our lives. So we bring in an awareness, and then we connect with a realization that we're not alone. And then I invite you again to maybe at this point offer that soothing or supportive touch that you were exploring before. Maybe it's a hand over your heart or a hand, wherever you need it right now, just to feel the warmth and gentle touch of your hand in this moment. And then I invite you to offer yourself this phrase, may I be kind to myself in this moment. This is self-kindness. May I give myself what I need in this moment. May I accept myself as I am. And if you're having a little bit of difficulty with just discovering these words, imagine that a dear friend or colleague or loved one is having the same problem. And again, invite those words or phrases into your own experience, seeing if you can just hold a few of those words you'd offer them in your own heart. What messages can you offer yourself just in this small moment, this little break? So just sitting in this experience, again, these phrases, this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in the moment. May I give myself what I need. And if that and when that feels complete to you, I invite you just to slowly open your eyes again and just take a moment to settle with that practice. This is the third practice I want to offer you. It's called a self-compassion break. And you can do this in a sort of meditation experience like we just did over 5, 10, 15 minutes, as long as you need it. Or you can do it instantly in a moment. When a moment of stress arises, it can be within seconds. Oh, this is hard. I'm not alone. Other people would feel this stress too. What can I offer myself in this moment for kindness? So I've just invited 3 different quick and easy practices, easy being that they're easy to do, not always easy to practice. So I just recognize that sometimes this stuff is easy in our head, but when we have to actually, embody it a little bit, it takes a lot of practice and experience. So I very much understand that. And what I would really like to do, so I'm going to name those three again. The first one was treating ourselves as we would a dear friend. The second was offering soothing touch and tone, or supportive touch and tone. So a gentle touch, like a hug to ourselves, and a gentle tone. And the third is something called the self-compassion break, having some phrases that we say to ourselves in a moment. And what I would really love to do is just take 10 minutes and pop into some breakout rooms. So if you haven't been on Zoom before, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about breakout rooms, because sometimes they can be a little bit anxiety inducing. And I have to tell you for myself, normally, or I've been in lots of Zoom meetings lately, and as soon as someone says breakout rooms, my first initial reaction is like, I hate those. So I've been doing a lot of work around trauma-informed mindfulness and self-compassion. And so here's my invitation. Breakout rooms have the power to really connect and dive deeper into these practices when we have the opportunity to share. However, there is some permission granting around this. If it doesn't feel safe for you to go into a breakout room, I'm going to invite you to stay back and just hang out with me. I'll be staying in this main room, and there's an invitation to just stay here. You can also turn your camera off and not engage if you don't want to. So I'm going to give you an invitation to jump in with 3 or 4 other people. And my question is of these 3 practices, what do you think resonated for you, or why? And then I'd like to come back and have just a few minutes of questions. And I'm only going to give you 5, maybe 8 minutes in a breakout room, because we're a little bit short on time. But I think it's really nice to actually have a moment to share our feelings and ideas with people. And this way you can turn off your mics and do it. So the other thing about breakout rooms is if it feels a little bit stuck and you're not quite sure, you can call for help. I'm going to be right here. And you're never alone in these breakout rooms. So what I'm going to do right now, we're going to continue to take a few minutes to just ask any questions, or what of those practices resonated, or if there's anybody who just wants to share a little bit of their own experience through this. We have a few minutes left. So welcome back to those of you who are just in your breakout group. I hope that was a nice chance to connect and share with some colleagues around these practices. Just an invitation now, if there's anybody who has any questions for me for our last few minutes together, you can put them in the chat. You're welcome to put your hand up. You're welcome to wave me down, or if anybody has any thoughts or feelings about what you've just gone through. Yes, Michelle, I see your hand up. Remember to unmute yourself.
I'm trying, thank you.
There you go.
Hi, everyone, I'm Michelle. I just, in our little group, I was just reflecting on that idea of one of my big concerns going back into the school is kids and their need to touch. And so how beneficial, again, it's, I think we should be looking at it from ourselves, or could be, but I'm looking at it too for other kids and other people, how beneficial to teach them that soothing touch so that they can start to help soothe themselves. And yeah. And then the other piece was how even when we're out in the community, I've been out to buy food and things like that, even still how alone it feels out there. So that idea of we're in this together, because right now it feels like everybody, even out in the community, are kind of in their bubble and really working hard to stay isolated. So yeah, really useful practices. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Thanks for sharing that. And I think I'm a big believer in whatever we want our kids to learn, we need to model. And so that soothing touch, you know, if we want our kids to learn that, then it's a great practice to start showing them for ourselves. I'm having a hard moment right now. I'm just gonna like, take a deep breath and hold my heart, because this is hard. You know, acknowledging to our students, you know, wow, it feels really lonely out there right now. All these people are shopping, or when you walk down the street, they like walk way away around from you. You know, it doesn't feel so easy. How, you know, at least we're all feeling these feelings. We're not alone in these feelings. Yeah, so thank you, Michelle, for sharing that. I'm just going over to the chat really quickly. Ricky said it was good to what I experienced and listening to the ideas of others. We talked about how Not being able to use touch with kids emphasizes the importance of tone of voice. Yes, I so appreciate that. So again, that concept of compassion, giving it out when kids are hurting, you know, ooh, this must be really hard for you. I wish I could give you a hug, but my tone is going to be real gentle. And so I guess in all this invitation that I want to offer you is just think about how you would offer a student who's going through, oh, you know, you must be having a really difficult time with this situation right now. When you can offer it like that in that tone to your students, to your children, to your pets, to the loved ones you're with, just that invitation that what would it be like to offer it back to yourself? These are practices. They're not a magic wand. They're not going to fix everything really quickly. And they're not going to be the one time you do it and it, you know, it just doesn't feel right away. It's one of these things we need to continue to go on with. So I love how, I mean, as educators, we're so good at taking this to go towards our students and the people that we love. Just that constant invitation. How can we do this for ourselves so that we can model a sense of presence, a sense of calm, a sense of loving connectedness when we do that for ourselves? Ruth, you've got your hand up. Is that right?
Yeah, I have
Awesome.
to unmute.
Yep, unmute. Oh, you're still muted. Try it again.
Unmute.
There it is.
I'm not muted now. You know, talking in the breakout session just now with Ed, it's kind of interesting to me, and I always wonder why it is exactly, because I have had periods of my life where I've done mindfulness every day, very, very methodically, and done it for long periods of time. But during this whole pandemic, I started it today, you know, and it is funny when we need it the most, it seems the hardest to do. And
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And you know, one of the things with the self-compassion program and the work that I teach, mindfulness is implicit. And sometimes we feel like we need to sit down and practice, you know, like on a chair, on a cushion. And yes, those are great ways to retrain our brain to be coming back to the moment. But sometimes it's the constant practices, the everyday moments, it's the coming into it and then meeting it with kindness that actually can retrain it a whole bunch. And so I welcome back to your practice. Keep it up. I think, you know, it's always hard to do these things sometimes, but also that gentleness of like, sometimes we're really good at shooting on ourselves, you know? So maybe I didn't practice before, but now here I am now. And I'm going to just try today. Right?
Yeah, I'm really great about abusing myself about my lack of mindfulness practice, so that I know is not the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just a gentle invitation to see if we can change that tone.
Yeah.
So I'm recognizing we're coming to the end of our hour. I'm so grateful for those of you showing up. A couple things, you know, Sooke is doing a lot of work around mindfulness and supports. And I know Michelle, who was speaking earlier, can tell you a little bit about some of the upcoming things, perhaps for next year. I know, you know, I've been running a program called Mindfulness for Educators. I'm hoping we'll be back in some form of offering it to teachers next year. Educators, all educators in Sooke. I know there's lots of work going on that supports the work for yourself first, and then engaging it with your students. I'm seeing people talking about things like Go Noodle and mindfulness videos for your students. My invitation is that you come back and practice for yourself first. It's always really great for modeling. Ruth's giving us some big thumbs up with that. I run self-compassion practices. I teach an 8-week course. I love to share this work with educators. You can find me at lisabayless.com. So feel free to check out my website. I'm planning a summer course. So if you're wanting to know more about how to do some of this work a little bit more, I'm tentatively saying it may be in person if we can find a big enough venue and we can spread out enough in a really beautifully distant socializing way. I think it's possible. So please stay in touch. Please stay engaged. If you have any other questions, feel free to message me. I'll stay online for a few minutes, but I'm gonna just say have a great Pro D Day, a lovely long weekend. May you find many practices and ways to support yourself during these struggles with some kindness and care. And thanks for showing up today. I really appreciate it.